Last week, the United States House of Representatives tied 212 to 212. 3 Republicans crossed the aisle. 1 Democrat broke ranks the other way. And a resolution that would have ordered Donald Trump to end the Iran war fell by the margin of a single vote that never happened. And then this week, something even more remarkable occurred. The Senate voted 50 to 47 to move forward with a resolution to force President Donald Trump to end the war in Iran. And it passed because of one man who had nothing left to lose. But before we get to that man, before we get to what happens next, I need to take you inside the machine, because most people watching this story think it's about politics, about Republicans and Democrats fighting over a war. It's not. It's about something much more fundamental. It's about who, in the United States of America, actually has the legal authority to take your country to war. And right now, in May 2026, nobody can give you a clean answer to that question. Let me explain why that matters to you personally. Gas prices have surged to an average of $4.48 a gallon nationally as of May 5th, according to AAA. Before the war, prices were below $3 a gallon on average. That's not an abstraction. That's money coming directly out of your pocket every single week. More than 8 in 10 Americans said pain at the pump is putting a strain on their household budgets, according to the latest NPR/PBS News/Marist poll. By a 63 to 37% margin, respondents said they blame Trump for the current increase in gas prices, including a third of Republicans. Let that land for a second. A third of the president's own voters blame him for what they're paying at the pump, and that number is moving. Republicans' disapproval of Trump's handling of the economy reached a new high of 37% in a new AP/NORC poll, a major red flag for the GOP ahead of the 2026 midterm elections. A record share of Republicans expressing dissatisfaction with the economy could signal a meaningful shift inside his own coalition. This is the context inside which this war powers drama is playing out. And to understand why it matters, you need to understand the law that sits at the center of all of it. The War Powers Act, passed on November 7, 1973, was designed to restrain the president's ability to commit U.S. forces overseas by requiring consultation with and reporting to Congress before involving U.S. forces in foreign hostilities. It was passed to prevent situations like the Vietnam War. Think about what that means. The United States fought an entire decade-long war in Vietnam. Tens of thousands of Americans died, without Congress ever formally declaring war. The War Powers Resolution was Congress's attempt to make sure that could never happen again. The act mandates that the president must notify Congress within 48 hours of deploying troops and requires congressional approval for extended military actions beyond 60 days, with an additional 30 days allowed for safe withdrawal. Simple enough, right? 60 days. After that, either Congress authorizes the war or it ends. Except here's the problem. Presidents have generally resisted or ignored the War Powers Act, viewing it as an unconstitutional usurpation of their executive authority. Every single president since 1973, Democrat and Republican, has found ways to work around it, challenge it, or simply ignore it. Since the 1970s, every sitting president has either sidestepped some of the law's provisions or labeled it unconstitutional. Reagan deployed military personnel to El Salvador without consulting or submitting a report to Congress. In 1999, President Clinton continued a bombing campaign in Kosovo beyond the 60-day time limit. A more recent dispute arose in 2011 when President Obama initiated military action in Libya without congressional authorization. So the pattern is clear. Presidents wage war. Congress objects. Nothing happens. The law sits there, passed but never truly enforced, like a speed limit sign on a highway where the police never show up. Until now, it feels different, and I want to explain exactly why. On February 28, 2026, the United States launched a joint attack on Iran in collaboration with Israel. At 1:15 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the U.S. military commenced Operation Epic Fury, a strategic attack against Iranian targets to weaken Iran's security infrastructure. Israeli and United States forces also killed Iran's Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and other Iranian leaders. This was not a surgical airstrike. This was not a targeted killing. This was a full-scale military operation that decapitated the leadership of a nation of 90 million people. And it happened without a single vote in Congress. Almost immediately, some members of Congress claimed President Trump's actions violated the Constitution's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, which grants the power to declare war to Congress. Democrats began bringing war powers resolutions to the floor, and for months, they kept losing. The Senate rejected Iran war powers resolutions 7 consecutive times since the conflict began. In the House, the first vote in March failed 212 to 219. The second in April failed 213 to 214. Each time, the margin was getting smaller. And then came May 14th. The final vote tied at 212 to 212, with 3 Republicans, Representatives Thomas Massie of Kentucky, Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, and Tom Barrett of Michigan, voting in favor of the measure. In contrast, one Democrat, Representative Jared Golden from Maine, broke ranks to oppose it. In the House, a tie vote means the measure fails. But this is where the story gets interesting, because a tie isn't a defeat. A tie is a warning. A tie tells you exactly where the pressure is building and where the walls are starting to crack. Republicans have been broadly supportive of Trump's efforts to destroy Iran's nuclear capabilities. But some are now saying the president's legal timeline to wage a war without congressional approval has expired. Under the War Powers Resolution of 1973, presidents have 60 days to engage in a military conflict before Congress must either declare war or authorize the use of military force. Representative Brian Fitzpatrick, a Pennsylvania Republican, put it simply, "We're past 60 days, so it's got to be brought to us to vote on. We're following the law." Read that again. A Republican congressman, sitting in the majority, supporting a president from his own party, standing up on the floor of the House of Representatives and saying, "We are following the law." Not because he hates Trump, not because he's suddenly a Democrat, because he's reading a 1973 law and doing arithmetic. On May 1st, 2026, the 60-day deadline, Trump sent a letter to Congress stating that on April 7th, he had ordered a 2-week ceasefire, that the ceasefire had since been extended, and that there had been no exchange of fire between U.S. forces and Iran since April 7th. Therefore, hostilities had terminated. Hours later, still without any authorization from Congress, the president said, "You know, we're in a war." Let that contradiction sit with you for a moment. The president told Congress the war was over in the morning, and then told reporters he was still in a war in the afternoon, on the same day, about the same conflict. The White House argues that the requirements of the War Powers Resolution no longer apply because of the ceasefire with Iran. But that argument has a problem. Despite the ceasefire reached on April 8th, the cost of gas in the U.S. has continued to climb. And Trump himself said he was just an hour away from ordering another strike on Iran earlier this week, but held off because Gulf allies said they were engaged in negotiations. Trump also said on social media that military leaders should be prepared to go forward with a full, large-scale assault of Iran on a moment's notice. You cannot simultaneously tell Congress the war is over and tell your military commanders to be ready for a full-scale assault on a moment's notice. Those two statements cannot both be true. And that contradiction is exactly what's driving Republicans in Congress toward the exit door. Now let's talk about the Senate, because this week something happened that was genuinely unprecedented. Senators approved a motion to discharge the resolution from committee in a 50-47 vote. 4 Republicans, senators, Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Rand Paul of Kentucky, and Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, joined the bulk of Democrats in favor of advancing the resolution. Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania was the sole Democrat to oppose. The successful vote marked only a first step in the Senate, but it still marked a milestone for Democrats after 7 failed attempts to advance Iran-related measures. 7 failed attempts. And on the 8th try, they broke through. The key to understanding why lies with one man, Bill Cassidy, senator from Louisiana. And here is the part that makes this story genuinely extraordinary. The vote marked the first time Cassidy Cassidy supported advancing a war powers resolution. It came days after he failed to win enough support to advance to a runoff in the Louisiana GOP Senate primary, where Trump endorsed one of his opponents. Cassidy failed to advance to a runoff against Trump-endorsed challenger Representative Julia Letlow in the Louisiana primary election last week. His vote indicates that he is now more willing to challenge Trump. Cassidy said in a statement, "While I support the administration's efforts to dismantle Iran's nuclear program, the White House and Pentagon have left Congress in the dark on Operation Epic Fury. In Louisiana, I've heard from people, including President Trump's supporters, who are concerned about this war." There it is. Read it one more time. A Republican senator from Louisiana, Trump country, deep red Louisiana, saying that Trump's own supporters are concerned about this war. Not liberals, not Democrats. Trump voters in Louisiana are calling their senator and saying, "What is the plan here?" Cassidy kept his plan to vote to advance the resolution secret until the last moment. He declined to reveal how he would vote on the measure when asked about it Monday. He waited, he watched, and then at the last possible moment, he crossed. Now here's the part that Washington is not talking about loudly enough. 3 senators were absent Tuesday: John Cornyn of Texas, Tom Tillis of North Carolina, and Tommy Tuberville of Alabama. And if all 3 vote against it, it would break 50-50 and fail. Those absences were not accidents. 3 GOP senators weren't present for the vote Tuesday, hence why the resolution succeeded. Think about what that means. 3 sitting Republican senators decided that the politically safest thing for them to do on a vote about whether the United States should continue a war in the Middle East was to not show up. They didn't want to vote yes. They didn't want to vote no. They wanted to disappear for the day. That is not confidence. That is not conviction. That is a party that is quietly, privately, deeply uncomfortable with where this war is going, and does not yet have the courage to say so out loud. Republicans have largely backed Trump's military campaign, but unease within the GOP has grown as the conflict has dragged on without congressional authorization. And the numbers explain why. About 7 in 10 Americans, 69%, are concerned about higher gas and fuel prices as a result of the U.S. military action against Iran, including 45% who are extremely concerned. Of the potential outcomes polled, this one worries Americans most. According to Pew Research, that concern is directly eroding Republican confidence in Trump's foreign policy decision-making. Republicans who are concerned about higher gas prices are also less likely to have confidence in Trump's policymaking on Iran. Among Republicans who are extremely or very concerned about gas prices, 56% have confidence in him, while 44% do not. 44% of gas-concerned Republicans don't trust Trump's Iran policy. That is not a rounding error. That is a structural political problem. And it gets worse. Just 24% of Americans say that, considering both the costs and the benefits, the decision to take military action in Iran has been worth it. A larger share, 51%, say it has not been worth it, while 22% are unsure. And 66% say the U.S. should work to end its involvement in the conflict quickly, even if it means we do not achieve all of our goals in Iran. The American people are not asking for victory. They are asking for an exit, and their representatives in Congress are starting to listen. A Fox News poll published in late April found that 55% of Americans oppose military action against Iran. Nearly 6 in 10 respondents said the war will not improve the safety of Americans enough to justify military action. This is a Fox News poll. This is not MSNBC. This is not a left-leaning outlet. This is the network that Trump supporters watch, and their own viewers, by a majority, oppose this war. Now, I want to be precise about what the War Powers Resolution actually does and doesn't do, because there's a crucial detail that most coverage is glossing over. The vote is largely symbolic, as Trump can veto the measure. Even if Congress were able to eke out a win and pass a War Powers Resolution, Trump would likely veto it, and there isn't the requisite support in either chamber to override a veto. So why does any of this matter? Because symbolism in politics is not nothing. Because when the vote margin in the House goes from 212 to 219 in March, to 213 to 214 in April, to 212 to 212 in May, that is a trend line. That is momentum. That is a body of elected officials slowly, vote by vote, changing their calculation about what their constituents will tolerate. Representative Brian Fitzpatrick put it directly. The next time they bring it, it's passing. And what happened when the vote was about to pass this week? As it became clear that Republicans would not have the numbers to defeat the bill due to absences, GOP leaders declined to hold a vote on it. They pulled it. They canceled it. They made it disappear from the schedule. In a joint statement, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries and other Democratic caucus leaders said Republicans were cowardly to pull the vote. Democratic Representative Gregory Meeks of New York, who sponsored the resolution, said, "We had the votes without question, and they knew it. And as a result, they're playing a political game." Democratic leaders wrote, "Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth took us to war without clear objectives, an exit strategy, public support, or the authorization required by the United States Congress." And here is the deeper constitutional question that this moment forces us to confront. As the United States drifts deeply into a congressionally unauthorized war with Iran, the case for resolving the war powers question has never been stronger. Because right now, we have a White House that says the war is over while threatening to resume it. We have a Congress that can't get a vote held. We have a 1973 law that every president since Nixon has called unconstitutional, but no court has ever struck down. Every president since the War Powers Resolution was passed in 1973 has been of the opinion that it was unconstitutional, though it's never been challenged in court. That legal vacuum, that space where the law says one thing and the president does another, and no court intervenes, is where American wars now live. For Congress, the growing momentum to pass a war powers resolution could eventually lead to a legal showdown over who has the final authority over military conflicts. That showdown has never happened in 50 years. But the 212 to 212 tie, the 50 to 47 Senate vote, the canceled House vote this week, these are the signs that it might finally be coming. Democratic Representative Adam Smith of Washington put it plainly. People are beginning to finally listen to the American people who don't support the war in Iran. And I think there's a growing number of Republicans who see how devastating the war has been for our country. But here's the part that deserves your full attention. Not the vote counts, not the procedural maneuvers, the human reality underneath all of it. Senator Tammy Duckworth, who served in the Iraq War with the Air National Guard, argued that the Iran war has amounted to a strategic blunder. Trump started a war, and he's made things worse than before, Duckworth said, pointing to Iran's new leadership and the country's willingness to put a chokehold on commercial shipping. She served. She was shot down flying a Black Hawk helicopter in Iraq. She lost both her legs. When she says a war has been handled badly, that's not a partisan talking point. That is someone who has paid a price most politicians never will. Senator Tom Tillis, a Republican who has voted against the war powers resolutions, expressed frustration with the Trump administration's stance, especially from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. The current status quo, Pete Hegseth demonstrates how incompetent he is. Tillis added that he would be willing to vote for an authorization for use of military force. A Republican senator calling his party's defense secretary incompetent, publicly, on the record. That is not normal. That is a party beginning to fracture along fault lines that gas prices and a dragging war are opening up faster than party discipline can close them. Trump turned his fire on Representative Brian Fitzpatrick on Wednesday, telling reporters, "He likes voting against Trump. You know what happens with that? It doesn't work out well." Fitzpatrick told Axios that he still intended to vote for the measure despite the president's threats. "We don't report to any party or any person here in D.C.," he said. That exchange tells you everything about where this is going. A president threatening a congressman from his own party, a congressman publicly refusing to be threatened, and a canceled vote that only delayed what now appears to be inevitable. GOP leaders plan to bring the measure back up when the chamber returns from its week-long Memorial Day recess. When Congress comes back, this vote happens. And this time, the numbers may finally be there. So here is where we actually are. The United States has been at war with Iran for nearly 3 months. The war has blown past the 60-day requirement under the War Powers Act for the president to seek congressional authorization. Gas prices are more than 50% higher than they were before the war started. Majorities of Americans, including significant minorities of Republicans, want it to end. 4 Republican senators have now voted to constrain the president's war powers. 3 Republican House members crossed the aisle, and the House leadership canceled a vote because they knew they would lose. None of this ends the war. Not yet. The veto pen in the Oval Office remains the final check. But something has shifted. The vote showed how Republicans are increasingly uneasy with a conflict that shows no signs of ending, is locked in a fragile ceasefire, and is causing rising gas prices. The vote shows increasing headwinds to the war with Iran, especially as gas prices continue to soar ahead of the summer driving season and the 2026 midterms. The midterms. That's the word that cuts through every piece of political maneuvering in Washington right now. November 2026, 6 months away. Democrats lead by 10 points on the congressional ballot test, according to the NPR/PBS/Marist poll. 10 points. That is the number that Republican members of Congress are staring at when they decide whether to show up for a vote, whether to cross the aisle, whether to call the defense secretary incompetent on the record. The War Powers Resolution was born out of Vietnam, out of a war that killed 58,000 Americans and cost a president his presidency. The law passed because Congress finally decided that no single person, no matter how powerful, should have the unilateral authority to take a nation to war. 53 years later, that argument is being made again. In a House chamber where the votes now tie. In a Senate chamber where absences tell a story louder than speeches. By a Republican senator from Louisiana who lost his primary and had nothing left to lose. J.D. Vance, casting the tie-breaking vote to defeat a bipartisan Senate War Powers resolution in January 2026, declared that the War Powers Act is fundamentally a fake and unconstitutional law. It may be unconstitutional, it may be imperfect, it may be a law that every president has found ways to circumvent. But here is the question it forces. If not this law, then what? If 60 days of war without a vote isn't enough to require congressional approval, then what is? If a country can be taken to war by one man without a single vote from the people's elected representatives, then what exactly is the legislature for? That question doesn't have a clean answer tonight. But the 212 to 212 tie, the 50 to 47 Senate vote, the canceled House vote, the Republican senators who disappeared for the day, all of it suggests that more and more people inside the building that makes America's laws are asking it. And when Congress comes back from recess, the vote that was canceled will be called again. And this time, the numbers say it passes. What happens then is a question no one in Washington is quite ready to answer.